Racial profiling is a persistent civil rights issue in the United States, especially concerning African American communities. This incident involving a decorated black veteran peacefully dining at a local diner and being wrongly targeted by police officers falls within a troubling pattern. Racial profiling is defined as the discriminatory practice by law enforcement officials of targeting individuals for suspicion of crime based on the individual's race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. The U.S. Constitution prohibits such conduct under the Fourth Amendment, which guards against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection under the law. In this incident, police officers reportedly responded to a 911 call alleging suspicious behavior by a black man sitting alone in a public diner. No criminal activity was observed or reported beyond his presence and demeanor. When the officers arrived, they approached the individual without probable cause or reasonable suspicion, thereby violating established legal standards. According to the precedent set by Terry v. Ohio, 1968, police may briefly detain a person if they have a reasonable suspicion that the person is involved in criminal activity. However, reasonable suspicion must be based on articulable facts, not racial appearance or assumptions. Courts have repeatedly ruled that mere presence in a location, even a high-crime area, does not justify a stop and frisk or prolonged questioning without further objective factors. Furthermore, the Department of Justice has issued guidance against racial profiling, especially in contexts where no crime has been committed and the individual is cooperating peacefully. In this case, the veteran's peaceful behavior and lawful presence at the diner should have precluded any law enforcement action. The veteran's identity as a former service member adds further complexity. Veterans are protected under multiple federal programs and laws, including the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, USERRA. But more broadly, veterans are often regarded as individuals who have served and protected the nation. Treating such an individual with suspicion in the absence of criminal indicators not only disrespects their service, but also undercuts public confidence in policing. The wrongful targeting of the veteran could be actionable under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, which allows individuals to sue government officials, including police officers, for violations of constitutional rights. If evidence supports that the officers acted without reasonable suspicion or probable cause and targeted the veteran based on his race, he may have grounds for a civil rights lawsuit. This legal path could also invoke precedent from Hren v. United States, 1996. Which acknowledged that while police may make pretextual stops if there is an actual traffic violation, stops based solely on race are unconstitutional. Civil rights organizations such as the ACLU have long documented and challenged racial profiling practices by law enforcement, arguing that they create fear, humiliation, and distrust between police and minority communities. Federal data and independent research also confirm that African Americans are disproportionately stopped, searched, and subjected to force by police compared to white Americans. This incident underscores the systemic nature of these practices. Additionally, public spaces such as restaurants and diners are considered places of public accommodation under Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin in such establishments. If the diner staff or patrons contributed to the false report based solely on the veteran's race, they could also face liability for discriminatory actions. While private individuals are not typically bound by constitutional provisions like public officials are, they can still be held accountable under federal anti-discrimination statutes. The police department involved may also be liable if the officers' actions were consistent with a broader pattern or practice of racial profiling. Under the Monell v. Department of Social Services, 1978, decision, municipalities can be held liable for civil rights violations if they result from official policies or long-standing customs. If the officers were inadequately trained or encouraged to act on racial biases, the department could face federal oversight or consent decrees requiring reforms. Beyond legal ramifications, incidents like this have a profound social impact. Communities of color frequently express concern that law enforcement does not protect them equally and instead views them as inherent threats. When such concerns are realized in the public eye, particularly when it involves a respected veteran, the public outcry can lead to protests, policy reviews, and political action. This was observed in past high-profile cases such as those involving Henry Louis Gates Jr. and others, where peaceful individuals of color were subjected to unjust police scrutiny. The veteran in question may also face long-term psychological consequences, including humiliation, stress, and trauma. These outcomes are often discussed in the context of racial battle fatigue, a term coined in academic literature to describe the cumulative stress experienced by individuals of color due to repeated racial microaggressions and overt discrimination. Medical research links such stress to adverse health outcomes, which further illustrates the societal cost of racial profiling. At the policy level, numerous cities have implemented reforms aimed at curbing racial profiling. These include mandatory body cameras, data collection on police stops, anti-bias training, and community review boards. Yet such reforms are only effective when enforced with transparency and accountability. In this case, public demand for answers, possible internal investigations, and potential civil litigation could drive necessary institutional change within the department. Furthermore, if the incident was recorded by bystanders or surveillance footage, it could serve as powerful evidence both legally and in the court of public opinion. Such documentation has been crucial in holding law enforcement accountable in previous cases, as seen with George Floyd and others. Media coverage and social media amplification often play significant roles in drawing attention to these injustices. Finally, the veteran's background and service record may open the door for support from military organizations, Veterans Affairs offices, and public advocates. These groups may offer legal assistance, psychological support, and advocacy to ensure that justice is pursued and public awareness is raised. In conclusion, the wrongful targeting of a black veteran at a diner represents not only a violation of individual rights but a reflection of broader systemic issues in American law enforcement. It demonstrates the urgent need for stronger accountability, legal redress mechanisms, and cultural change within policing to ensure equal treatment and constitutional protections for all individuals, regardless of race or background. Remaining calm and respectful during a police encounter is not only a powerful personal choice, but also carries important legal and practical implications. In the United States, every individual, regardless of background, is constitutionally protected during police interactions. The Fifth Amendment protects the right to remain silent, while the Fourth Amendment guards against unreasonable searches and seizures. These rights are essential in maintaining one's legal standing during potentially escalated law enforcement encounters. When a black veteran remains composed and chooses not to escalate, even under aggressive questioning, it reflects an understanding of these constitutional protections. The legal foundation begins with the understanding that police officers must have either reasonable suspicion or probable cause to engage an individual. If neither is present, any detainment or questioning may be considered a violation of constitutional rights. Under Terry v. Ohio, 1968, officers are allowed to conduct a limited search for weapons if they believe someone may be armed and dangerous, but this belief must be supported by objective facts. Calmly choosing not to resist or argue is often seen as a wise course of action in the moment, preserving the individual's safety while maintaining a strong legal position. In this scenario, the veteran does not react emotionally or physically, but instead makes a quiet phone call to a military contact. This decision carries both symbolic and legal weight. Veterans, particularly those with active military affiliations or connections to higher-ranking officials, may have access to institutional advocacy channels. Contacting a military superior or legal representative can trigger internal protocols that ensure the situation is escalated to the appropriate authorities for oversight. For example, if the veteran is still within the reserves or recently discharged, he may be under the jurisdiction of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, or maintain active contacts within the Department of Defense, DOD. Moreover, military personnel and veterans have the option to report such incidents to the Department of Veterans Affairs or legal support branches within veteran service organizations such as the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars VFW, or Disabled American Veterans, DAV. These entities often provide legal assistance or intervention, especially when a veteran is being mistreated in a public setting due to profiling or abuse of authority. The quiet phone call made during this encounter may also serve as documentation or legal evidence that the veteran attempted to protect his rights and seek oversight through formal channels. From a legal standpoint, non-resistance and cooperation with police, even under unjust circumstances, can serve to strengthen the individual's case in any subsequent civil rights action. Under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, a civil action can be brought against law enforcement officers who, under color of law, deprive any person of rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution. In such a lawsuit, the veteran's calm behavior and attempt to resolve the issue through official communication could be used as evidence to show that the officer's conduct was unjustified and excessive. Furthermore, when police interactions involve a protected class such as veterans or individuals targeted due to race, courts are more likely to scrutinize the motivations and conduct of the officers involved. If it is shown that the individual was targeted because of their race or appearance rather than behavior or lawful suspicion, the claim may also fall under federal civil rights statutes, such as Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination by any agency receiving federal funding, including most police departments. In many jurisdictions, police officers are subject to departmental policies that require de-escalation training, anti-bias protocols, and clear standards of conduct. Failure to follow these policies can result in administrative action, civil liability, or even criminal charges. A veteran remaining calm while exercising his right to legal counsel and refusing to escalate the situation could prompt an internal affairs investigation if the officer's behavior is reported or documented. If body camera footage is available or if the event was recorded by witnesses, this footage may be used to further support the veteran's claim that he acted lawfully and that officers overstepped their bounds. The decision to call a military contact also illustrates the veteran's awareness of the chain of command and the institutional power structures available to him. If the military contact is a high-ranking official or legal advisor, they may contact local or federal agencies to intervene. In some instances, direct communication from the Department of Defense or military command to local law enforcement may prompt immediate de-escalation and a shift in officer behavior. This reflects the reality that veterans, particularly decorated ones, hold a level of public respect and institutional protection not available to the average civilian. Legally, such intervention is not unprecedented. There have been cases where military officers or federal agents have intervened when their personnel or affiliates were wrongly detained or profiled. These interventions do not violate the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits the use of federal military forces for domestic law enforcement, because they do not involve military enforcement but rather institutional advocacy and oversight. Additionally, if the veteran works for or is affiliated with a federal agency, including defense contractors or security clearance-holding entities, then a wrongful stop or public confrontation could have implications for their security status, necessitating internal review and legal protection. That makes it even more critical for such individuals to remain composed and document the encounter. Remaining calm also protects the veteran from criminal liability. In many states, resisting arrest, even if the arrest is unlawful, can result in criminal charges. Courts have generally ruled that the appropriate recourse for an unlawful arrest is through the legal system, not physical resistance. Therefore, the veteran's choice to refrain from reacting emotionally or physically shields him from possible disorderly conduct or obstruction charges. Finally, public policy favors peaceful resolution of conflicts, especially between citizens and government officials. The veterans' measured behavior aligns with best practices recommended by civil rights attorneys and law enforcement watchdog organizations. These groups often advise that citizens remain calm, ask if they are free to leave, request legal counsel, and document everything. The quiet phone call made by the veteran encapsulates all of these steps in a dignified and legally sound manner. In summary, the veteran's calm response during aggressive police questioning, coupled with his decision to make a quiet phone call to a military contact, exemplifies a strategic and legally grounded reaction to an unjust encounter. His actions preserved his constitutional rights, established a clear legal record, triggered institutional support systems, and avoided escalation that could have led to further harm or criminal charges. These decisions not only protected him in the moment, but also laid the groundwork for any future legal action or policy reform. They reflect a deep understanding of both the law and the broader societal dynamics at play, setting a powerful example for how veterans and civilians alike can navigate high-stakes situations with dignity, clarity, and legal strength. The immediate shift in police behavior following a phone call made by a black veteran during a wrongful detainment is rooted in legal, institutional, and procedural frameworks that govern law enforcement conduct and federal military relations. When officers engage with a citizen, especially a veteran, they are bound not only by constitutional protections but also by departmental protocols and potential interagency communication standards. In this instance, the quiet call made by the veteran triggered a rapid response from higher authorities, prompting an immediate de-escalation. This reaction likely stems from a combination of recognized military status, federal legal protections for veterans, and departmental concerns over liability and public backlash. Legally, all police actions must be guided by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which requires reasonable suspicion for stops and probable cause for arrests. In this case, once the officers were informed by superior entities, potentially through military or federal law enforcement liaisons, that the individual they were questioning was a decorated and respected veteran, their risk calculus changed. Continued engagement without justification could constitute a civil rights violation under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. Police officers and their departments are frequently briefed on the legal consequences of unlawful detention and excessive use of force, especially when applied to protected groups. Veterans, particularly those with honorable service records and known affiliations with military command or federal entities, may receive heightened attention in these circumstances. If a military command or federal contact intervenes during an active police engagement, such intervention is usually advisory and not operational, complying with the Posse Comitatus Act, which limits the use of federal military personnel in domestic law enforcement. However, this act does not prevent military officials from advocating for their personnel or issuing urgent clarifications to local authorities to prevent legal fallout or reputational harm. Officers are trained to recognize and respond to high-priority communications that might originate from state or federal agencies. A single phone call from a high-ranking official, legal representative, or military liaison can prompt immediate changes in behavior due to internal departmental accountability systems. Most departments operate under a chain-of-command structure that includes real-time supervision via dispatch, watch commanders, or internal affairs monitors. When these superiors receive notice that the subject of police action is a high-status veteran or a potential victim of profiling, they are likely to issue immediate orders to stand down or reevaluate the situation. Legally, failing to obey such orders could result in departmental discipline or expose the department to greater liability. Law enforcement agencies are bound by civil service rules, collective bargaining agreements, and public transparency statutes that often mandate thorough documentation of all high-profile engagements. When federal or military contacts are involved, these records may become part of interagency reports, increasing pressure on the officers involved to act lawfully and respectfully. Veterans are protected under numerous statutes, including the Civil Rights Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, where applicable, and even Department of Veterans Affairs directives that address how public institutions should treat former military personnel. Moreover, the veteran's military status may be linked to ongoing security clearance, intelligence roles, or active reserve duties. Detaining such an individual without cause could risk interfering with national security processes or provoke inquiries from inspector generals or congressional oversight committees. Law enforcement officers who detain individuals under such circumstances are trained to recognize when they are dealing with someone who has institutional backing. When verification of the veteran's status is relayed, especially if tied to elite military branches or high-ranking officials, police must make rapid adjustments to avoid legal exposure. This includes disengagement, formal apology, and possibly transferring the situation to departmental legal counsel. Departments are particularly cautious in such incidents because federal legislation such as the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act, LESA, recognizes certain off-duty and retired military personnel as authorized to carry concealed firearms nationwide. If the detained veteran is among those authorized and legally armed, detainment becomes even more legally sensitive. Furthermore, most major law enforcement agencies undergo annual legal training that includes updates on civil rights, interagency, protocol, and specific risks associated with wrongful detentions. Case studies of past lawsuits and misconduct settlements are frequently used to instruct officers on how to avoid personal liability. Qualified immunity, the doctrine that protects officers from lawsuits in some circumstances, has limitations. When rights are clearly established, such as those protected by the Constitution or federal law, officers can be held personally liable. Once a superior communicates that the individual in question is a veteran of high regard, continuing the detainment would constitute an obvious rights violation, eliminating the shield of qualified immunity. Departments also face risk from internal auditing bodies or civilian review boards, which examine controversial stops involving race, rank, or excessive use of force. When these boards learn that a veteran was mistreated despite his calm demeanor and lawful conduct, their reports can lead to suspension, demotion, or termination of officers involved. Beyond legal consequences, reputational damage plays a critical role in the sudden shift in police behavior. Police departments are under constant scrutiny from the public, media, and government watchdogs. Incidents involving mistreatment of veterans, especially when caught on video or publicized online, can result in massive backlash, including protests, media investigations, and public relations crises. In anticipation of such outcomes, departments often instruct officers to disengage immediately if a stop is no longer legally justified, or if new information dramatically alters the context. The phone call that altered the officer's behavior in this case likely introduced such information, whether the veteran's military record, current clearance level, or direct intervention by a high-level authority. This directive would have come through command channels with instructions to de-escalate, potentially apologize, and disengage without further confrontation. Such rapid shifts in behavior are also driven by legal counsel available in real time to officers. Many departments employ on-call legal advisors or risk management consultants who can be consulted during high-risk incidents. If legal counsel determines that detaining the veteran poses more liability than benefit, officers are typically ordered to stand down. These decisions are rooted in the recognition that wrongful detainment cases involving veterans can result in significant settlements, or even federal civil rights investigations. Veterans who are targeted wrongfully and then vindicated by external intervention have historically received legal settlements, formal apologies, and policy changes at the department level. Cases such as Hope v. Pelzer and Saussure v. Katz provide additional legal precedent on use of force and rights violation involving government employees. These precedents stress the importance of context, training, and clear constitutional standards. When police behavior shifts rapidly after receiving information from higher authorities, it reflects a broader structure of checks and balances designed to prevent misuse of state power and to mitigate legal exposure. The veteran's calm actions, coupled with the institutional weight behind the phone call, represent a lawful and effective use of rights and connections to ensure safety, accountability, and justice. This shift is not merely anecdotal but is rooted in decades of constitutional law, departmental policy, and real-world legal risk management. The aftermath and public reaction to the wrongful detainment of a black veteran at a diner, particularly when captured on video by a bystander, are deeply tied to legal processes, civil rights frameworks, and systemic reform efforts. The circulation of such video footage through social media and news outlets immediately draws public attention to the broader issues of racial profiling, law enforcement accountability, and the treatment of veterans within the United States. Legally, video evidence serves as a primary piece of documentation in investigations led by internal affairs departments, civilian oversight boards, or external regulatory agencies. In high-profile cases where video evidence contradicts officers' initial statements or department reports, legal liabilities increase significantly, both for the individual officers and their employing agency. Under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, victims of civil rights violations, including unlawful detention or racial discrimination by government actors, may file federal lawsuits seeking monetary damages and injunctive relief. The existence of public video showing the veteran's lawful behavior and the officer's unwarranted actions could serve as compelling evidence in such a case. From a legal oversight perspective, police departments are often subject to consent decrees or pattern or practice. Investigations conducted by the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, Civil Rights Division when systemic issues are alleged. Such investigations examine patterns of misconduct, discriminatory policing practices, and failures in departmental accountability. If the wrongful detainment of the veteran is not an isolated event but part of a broader trend within the department, the incident may trigger formal DOJ inquiry under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601, which grants the federal government authority to address law enforcement misconduct. In similar past cases, DOJ investigations have resulted in federally mandated reform plans that include changes to use-of-force policies, de-escalation training, data collection on race-based stops, and increased civilian oversight. Public outrage following the release of footage often catalyzes these investigations. Civil rights organizations, including the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, NOC Legal Defense Fund, and National Police Accountability Project, frequently mobilize legal support, public statements, and petitions calling for justice in such cases. Media coverage amplifies the incident, placing pressure on public officials to act. City councils, police commissions, and mayors may initiate independent reviews or hearings to address the conduct of the officers involved and the broader implications for community police relations. Legally, municipalities have been found liable under Monell v. Department of Social Services, 1978, when constitutional violations result from official policies, practices, or customs. If it is shown that the officers acted in line with tolerated racial profiling or inadequate training, the city could face civil liability beyond the officer's individual actions. The involvement of a veteran further complicates the legal and political fallout. Veterans are widely respected across political and social spectrums, and their mistreatment is often viewed as an affront to national service legislation such as the Service Members Civil Relief Act, SCRA, and the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, USERRA, provide specific legal protections for veterans, but public respect and institutional affiliations also grant them informal protections that amplify public reaction when violated. The Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, and veterans advocacy groups often step in to provide legal counsel, public support, and direct communication with government agencies when veterans' rights are infringed upon. Public figures, including lawmakers and retired military officials, may comment on such incidents, bringing national attention and demanding policy reform. Apologies issued by police departments in such cases, while often necessary from a public relations standpoint, may carry legal consequences. Public apologies can be interpreted as admissions of fault, potentially impacting liability claims or settlements in pending lawsuits. Departments are therefore careful in crafting such statements, often consulting legal counsel before issuing them. In some instances, apologies are accompanied by commitments to retraining, policy audits, or external reviews to demonstrate accountability and mitigate further legal exposure. Civil litigation following the incident may include claims of false arrest, violation of equal protection rights under the 14th Amendment, infliction of emotional distress, and defamation if the officers made false public statements regarding the veteran's conduct. Settlements in similar cases have ranged from tens of thousands to millions of dollars, depending on the severity of the misconduct, the publicity involved, and the harm suffered. These settlements are often negotiated to avoid prolonged litigation and further reputational harm. In some jurisdictions, public funds used to settle police misconduct lawsuits must be disclosed under open government laws, leading to further scrutiny of how police departments are managed and held accountable. Additionally, the release of body camera footage, which may corroborate or contradict public recordings, becomes a legal obligation in many states under Freedom of Information statutes. Laws such as the California Public Records Act and similar transparency laws in other states mandate disclosure of such footage within a defined time frame, except when legally exempted due to ongoing investigations or privacy concerns. Departmental reviews initiated after such incidents often include audits of officer conduct, reevaluation of use of force guidelines, and mandatory training on racial bias and de-escalation. These reviews may be led by internal affairs or external consultants, depending on the political climate and public pressure. If officers are found to have violated departmental policies, disciplinary action can range from retraining and suspension to termination and decertification. State-level police certification boards may revoke officers' licenses, preventing them from serving in law enforcement roles in the future. Decertification databases, such as the National Decertification Index, track such outcomes to ensure transparency across jurisdictions. In the aftermath, public policy proposals frequently emerge at the local and state levels. Lawmakers may introduce legislation aimed at preventing similar incidents, such as mandatory racial bias training, improved complaint mechanisms, and enhanced protections for veterans interacting with law enforcement. Police accountability bills may also seek to limit qualified immunity or increase the personal financial liability of officers who commit civil rights violations. Public protest movements and advocacy campaigns also use such incidents as rallying points, organizing demonstrations, town halls, and legislative lobbying. These efforts may result in long-term reforms, including the establishment of independent civilian review boards, improved data transparency on police stops and arrests, and annual reporting requirements for use-of-force incidents. The veteran involved may also pursue non-legal remedies, including public speaking, advocacy, and working with reform organizations to shape public discourse and law enforcement practices. Their voice carries unique weight due to their service, background, and first-hand experience of profiling. This participation in reform movements can help shift public attitudes and institutional culture over time. Psychological and emotional support services may also be provided by veterans organizations and legal aid groups, recognizing the trauma associated with wrongful detainment and public profiling. In summary, the aftermath and public reaction to the wrongful detainment of a black veteran captured on video reflects a multi-layered legal process involving civil rights claims, departmental reviews, federal oversight, and public policy reform. The visibility of the event, legal protections afforded by the Constitution and federal statutes, and institutional backing from veteran support organizations collectively influence the trajectory of accountability. Video evidence acts as a critical tool for legal and public scrutiny, while legal frameworks such as 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and model liability define the pathways through which justice and reform are pursued. The public apology and departmental review that follow such an incident are not merely symbolic, but are integral to a broader process of restoring public trust, enforcing legal standards, and advancing systemic change in law enforcement practices.